plenty of comments rolling in about one of the busiest weekends of sport on and off the field that I can remember in a long time. Certainly one of the most controversial weekends that we've had to deal with. We'll get into the John Delaney saga when we hit the newspapers in a minute. We haven't talked about the football and Ireland's performance. They're getting a free pass. That's apparently the consensus, because nobody was really watching the game enough to consider having an opinion about the 97, 98 minutes of dross that we were inflicted with by Ireland. You were watching the game intently.
Well, we kind of had to, we had 2 hours to film, myself and Stephen O'Donnell in the studio with Nathan providing in-depth updates from Gibraltar. So we kind of had to watch it, and the phone starts buzzing at around 5 o'clock saying something might be happening later. I'm like, this is extremely interesting. I wish I was at home right now watching this game so I could look at my phone for 2 hours instead of looking at the game. So I put aside my phone, fully expecting to pick it up at 7 o'clock saying that John Delaney has left the FAI. And that hadn't transpired. So turned out it was actually a pretty good decision to just sit there and watch 90 minutes of Ireland. And when you talk about getting a free pass, are you talking about like the distraction of an EasyJet plane behind the goalposts? Or when they're shooting into the other goals, the distraction of a beautiful rock? Or are you talking about the wind, the plastic pitch, whatever it may be? Like, I'm not sure what the free pass is based on.
No one's rushing to judge how bad we played because, well, the facilities weren't good and, they're not used to wind.
Yes, and it was definitely the facilities that allowed Ireland to completely go into their shell and start pumping the ball long frequently after they went 1-0 up. We can blame the facilities on that, right?
Yeah, and the fact that Gibraltar sat deep like every bad team in world football does in any game where they're overmatched.
To be fair,
they almost scored. And from a set piece, they almost scored from a set piece.
Is that as good? Like when was the last time we saw a save like that from an Irish goalkeeper?
It was great, yeah.
It was, not that we've had a bad, goalkeepers being one of our strongest positions. I just think in any walk of life, in any level of football, that was an outrageously good save from Darren Randolph, especially with nobody on the post at that moment. I do think that the discourse would be a little bit different this morning, a little bit different had, say, the Gibraltar goalkeeper not made that incredible save in the first half, or that ridiculous clearance in the first half as well, which would have resulted in a 3-0 win, which I think you predicted last week would have been a reasonable start, nothing earth-shattering, but the fact that it was 1-0 and that save had to be made skews things hugely, and that's just three significant eventualities in the game that have gone otherwise. So perhaps you can say that we need to calm down a little bit until we see tomorrow night. But I also had my eye on Georgia against Switzerland the other day, and they keep the ball on the carpet quite a bit. They like to play football, and it's hard to know actually if a team who aren't world beaters that do like to play football is a positive or a negative for Ireland. I'm starting to think it might actually be a positive that they might try and play the ball around us and maybe like, nah, screw you, we're going to play crap football and we're going to beat you 1-0.
Well, they did it. You mean exactly the same as happened the last time?
Well,
where they massively outplay us and we scratch a win and we go, this is terrible, this is appalling, we can't afford it.
Exactly.
But when the same thing happens, if we're lucky enough to get 3 points, everybody will be like, Big Mick, the good times are back. Such a happy dressing room, otherwise we wouldn't have got through that.
Yeah.
I just think that there's double standards. If Keane and O'Neill had a scratchy 1-0 win in Gibraltar and blamed the wind,
it would have been the low point. The lowest of the low.
Come on. I mean,
they've reached an nadir. Why has John Delaney not sacked Mick McCarthy, or I should say Martin O'Neill and Roy Keane? That is what we will be talking about this morning.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I just think that where are the signs that Mick McCarthy has become a really good international manager? Where are those signs? Show me the signs. I want to see the evidence. I need to put my finger in the holes of the evidence.
Like the evidence that we can't accurately judge where Mick McCarthy is at is quite plentiful, as in he didn't have any friendlies leading up to this. And again, don't want to give a free pass, but I do want to wait until tomorrow night before we actually make a judgment of how this thing has started.
The bit about, so the experiment of having our two best players on the right-hand side of the defence and midfield, it didn't work. Is that entirely down to the players, or can good coaching convince or make the right back right side of midfielder? Because he seems like a good footballer who seems to be a fairly naturally intelligent, so he seems to have some football intelligence, but we can't make that work. And we've now had that experiment and we're ripping off the bandage on that one and going, okay, that'll never happen again, but we can't make any other judgments on the crappy performance.
Well, who's saying that? Okay, so to what extent?
Big Mick said after the game that the experiment of having Matt Doherty on the right side of midfield didn't work, and he took him off after however long it was.
He also said that Robbie Brady going in didn't exactly work either. The idea that it didn't work, like to what extent did it not work, and why do we need to completely ditch this now? Like
I agree, but it sounded like he was ditching it, that it's never going to happen again. Let's wait and see. Maybe he picks Matt Doherty on the right side of midfield. Matt Doherty's a good game in Dublin, and I don't know, but like,
what's the solution? Is it bench Matt Doherty? Is it play him on the left? I think that'd be
that would be next. Yeah, play him on the left, see what happens.
Bit harsh on Enda Stevens?
I mean, not really, because this guy's better than you at the moment. Like, get into the Premier League next season and let's see how you do. And then it's like, okay, all right, let's go.
There's a situation there where Matt Doherty is kind of on a pivot for the entire game and doesn't really know what to do. And is that his fault? Is that the way Ireland play? It's kind of hard to tell. I'd like to see him in the Aviva, in that position again. Let's just be sure that this thing didn't work, because when I say to what extent did it not work, it's not like, I know the answer to that question. It wasn't a disaster. Like, it didn't blow up in our faces. Like, it's in fact going down the right-hand side of the park, and granted, Matt Doherty was not the instigator of this, but going down the right-hand side of the park in the first half allowed us to have our biggest periods of joy. Like, that second quarter of the game when we played the best football on Saturday night did come down the right-hand side of the park. So it was not a disaster. That being said, you can't say, well, that really worked and that is something we should definitely be trying again. My suspicion is that we should just give it one more shot. Give him the start again at right midfield and let's see what happens, because it's not like there's a world beater at right mid that's looking to push Matt Doherty out of there. What we do know is that Matt Doherty is a Premier League talent and is well able to mix it with the best. Can we push him into this position where he gets the best out of himself there? The suspicion, and I will completely accept that argument, is that he can't, but let's just be sure of that before we completely move things around, because let's face it, at left back, in Enda Stevens, we do have a very, very good player as well.
All right, so you're happy?
I'm happy to, when you talk about changes for the second game, like, I don't know, are you mixing things up in midfields? Like I know Conor Hourhan got man of the match, Jeff Hendrick scored the goal. Is that the sort of midfield that's going to give us joy at home to Georgia? The idea before the game was that it wasn't. And then the other idea is up front, like David McGoldrick and Sean Maguire. We don't have a whole pile of options up front at the moment, which is the obvious thing. So you're actually kind of looking at a suite of changes here that probably can't be made. Who is the better option? Like, Robbie Brady is probably the only player that you can say can come into the squad and improve a position. But the question is, what position? Do you put him on the left instead of James McLean? Maybe that's the one change I would make. Yeah,
well, there are options if he deals with them. We're going to get Nathan on the line a little bit later on to talk about that game and also the continuing fallout from the John Delaney situation. We'll deal with that in a couple of minutes in the newspapers. Nathan was one of the many of the Irish journalists who took that picture of John Delaney under the VIP exit, but it's not quite exit, is it? It's like, actually, you know what, I'm going to have all the same access and power that I've always had. I'm just going to not look after the day-to-day running of the business, which is, I presume, the less interesting bits, right? Like, the best bits are the stadium, dealing with FIFA, dealing with UEFA, trying to get a World Cup bid together, if that's actually going to happen. Like, that's the best, most glamorous parts. The worst parts are, like, having to deal with the problem child of the league and, you know, the day-to-day nuts and bolts of being a CEO of, like, grassroots football, of local sports partnerships, of having to have conversations with the PFAI and having to deal with Sport Ireland. All that stuff off my desk, thanks very much. I mean, yeah, there's a bit of a pay cut, but who cares? I've got all that money coming from UEFA anyway. So,
if I'm John Delaney, or if I'm the CEO of any football association around the world, my number one aim is maximise time in Neon. Just get to Neon as much as possible, get to Zurich as much as possible, mix it with rich people as much as possible, because it is very, very possible to do that in footballing circles. So really, like, is John Delaney's set of skills better served doing that sort of thing? Maybe it is. That's what the people defending him would say. But then you look at the slew of information that we've got over the past fortnight or so, and really there are some ridiculous details emerging, from the bridging loan to the rent, to all this sort of thing that we've seen in the Sunday Times yesterday. That it just creates this rather weird spectrum around things, and it kind of comes off the back of him saying that he's going to become executive vice president on Saturday night, which was a rather unusual move. Like, there are so many questions that need to be answered on this front, and hopefully we'll get some sort of clarity on this front. I'm not so sure if we will, but, like, what does an executive vice president do, I think, is the number one question on all of our minds.
Well, like, they were pretty clear at what that new role will entail. It will be the representative for UEFA, and you need that level of role within your own association before you can work for UEFA. Why does that role have to be a paid role? Does that role have to be a paid role? Is it possible that role could be one of those roles where, he donates that salary back to the FAI if he is going to be mainly working with? One of the other issues arising from the papers today was that this might make it more difficult to get a really high quality candidate when you realise that there is somebody else who has power over these very important projects who doesn't report to you but who reports directly into the board, and you're kind of on the same level as them. So do you really want to be the third wheel of a relationship where everybody on the board basically has had a long-term relationship with this other candidate or this other person who has as you said, a relatively nebulous job description? We'll move on. We'll come back to that a little bit later on, and we'll try and reflect as much of the opinion that is coming across all of our social channels over the last 24, 48 hours as well. But the other big news at the weekend in terms of Gaelic football was the return of David Clifford, who, people were, well, what if he's going to be like a second season in the seniors sophomore slump from David Clifford? Instead, he walked on water yesterday, and you were there to witness it.
Yeah, he was class. He was absolutely class yesterday. He scored 5 points for Kerry in that win against Roscommon. You would have probably seen, people who were watching League Sunday last night would have got a glimpse of what he did. It's just his sharpness, his dummying, his point taking it all seems to be where it was last year. And I do wonder if there was a bit of an overreaction, from me included, last week when they lost to Mayo, and when there was moments during the league when they perhaps were a little bit more defensive. It seemed like a very obvious thing to say at the time, but the fact that David Clifford was yet to come back is something that is still worth reiterating, and we won't get full clarity on the true importance of his return until next Sunday, until the league final, until he's actually back in Croke Park. James O'Donoghue, again, got a couple of more minutes under his belt yesterday, looked very, very good as well, and they're starting to put together a forward line that can potentially challenge anybody in the country. He's just amazing to watch. He's as you say, walking on water. I can't really put it better myself in terms of the way he gracefully glides around the park, the way he manages to make things happen out of absolutely nothing, which is something that is so vital around this stage of the year when you're playing in grounds around the country in the National League. And his return just kind of coming perfectly as the weather starts to get a little bit better, as we start to get away from the ridiculous sort of conditions and high winds that we've seen at some stages in the league. And you kind of look at what was happening a few miles west yesterday afternoon as well, and that Mayo performance, and you start to remember that Mayo have basically played this entire league in what has been a tropical storm. Basically all their games have been I think the worst collection of weather that any team has ever put together in a National Football League, and they were kicking points yesterday that David Clifford would be proud of. Like Fergal Boland, just from watching the highlights last night, was in sensational form. Kevin McLaughlin looked brilliant for them. Aidan O'Shea was brilliant once again for them yesterday. And
so they won't keep the ball kicked out to Kerry in the league final, will they?
And and suddenly you're like looking at this week's league final, and it's starting to remind me of, say, how the heavyweight boxing picture was 12 months ago, where
when we thought everybody would meet.
Well, where we thought that Anthony Joshua was the unassailable leader in the heavyweight division, which is the view of Dublin at the moment, until they don't get the opportunity to play or go up against one of the other contenders earlier on in the calendar year, and then suddenly we get to the end of the year and we have Deontay Wilder against Tyson Fury, and we're like, hold on a minute, are one of these guys actually capable of beating Anthony Joshua? And many people after that fight could make that argument. Can that argument be made after this Sunday? Well, I've got a feeling it's going to be an absolute corker on Sunday, especially if the weather holds up, because these two teams played bloody good football yesterday afternoon. We've got a situation now where Mayo are back properly, and Kerry look like they're onto something as well.
Yeah. One last point in this before we move on. You're saying that Dublin are going to regret the fact they didn't reach a league final and get to test themselves in a big game on a Sunday afternoon in a cauldron, because it would have been 40, 50,000 if it had been Kerry, or 40, 50,000 if it had been Mayo in a league final, that they're going to regret that missed opportunity. They're going to get beaten this year. They're not doing 5 in a row is what I'm hearing you say.
I'm thinking that I'm starting to get a lot of hope. I'm starting to feel quite hopeful for the idea that this 5 in a row may not happen.
Here's what's...
Yeah, sorry, we can talk about it later.
Yeah, I mean, I set it up for you there, and you're like, oh, maybe, perhaps on the wet, windy, maybe...
The probability is that Dublin will still win the All-Ireland.
Sports pages, but that's not, I mean, we don't come here to hear your probability zone. Alan Quillen, 8:05, talking about the big build-up to the return of the Heineken Champions Cup this weekend. We'll look back on the GAA Leagues at 8:20. We'll bring in the sports news from Darren at 8:35. Kieran Donaghy's going to join us at 8:45. I suspect he'll be a little bit croaky after the Garvey's Tralee Warriors managed to miraculously win all the rest of their games at the end of the season. It's been a sensational back-to-back with Marion, where they win in overtime in Dublin on Saturday and then just see it out, get the business done on Sunday. Brilliant end to the league. We'll talk John Delaney with Nathan Murphy around about 9:05. Ireland versus Georgia, also with Nathan. And Mike Carson's going to join us to talk about the end of the Rob Gronkowski era, because he's retired. Suddenly Tommy's like, oh, is he? Is that happening? It is, yeah, a little bit later on, I hope. Gronk retired over the late last night, decided his 29-year-old body had enough.
Very smart decision. At the age of 29, you've won it all. You can't do any more damage to your body. I just think if you're in Gronkowski's shoes, it's an absolutely correct decision, especially given he's a tight end in one of the most attritional positions on the pitch. Not that there is any unattritional position in American football. So, he's made the correct call. I actually didn't see a statement. I'm not sure did he refer to preserving his health or anything like that, but I'm sure that was part of the decision.
Yeah, it was a badly typed out Instagram statement. It was a perfect finale for Gronkowski. I want to move on because big injury yesterday for the Galway hurlers. Joe Canning at the end of the game suffered an injury and ends up leaving the field in the league semi-final against Waterford on a stretcher. So Micheál Donoghue said he believed it was a groin injury that forced Canning off the pitch at the end of the game. Let's hear from Tommy Walsh, and here's first Micheál Donoghue about the injury that he received.
Hey, look, he's just literally still being assessed by the medical, so until they determine what it is, and we see, as I said, the severity of it, we'll be acting upon it tonight, I'm sure, or tomorrow.
Is it his ankle or knee or?
No, it's his groin. I think it's his groin. Yeah, at the minute. Yeah. So look, he took a few heavy hits. I'm really intrigued to watch it back and see the hits he got going into it just before it. So
he tends to get a lot, obviously, because he is the pace he carries. Obviously, it's always a bit of a risk, but it must be. When you see those hits come in, you must be worried at what point is it going to happen that something like this will happen.
I know, but look, that's the nature of it. But as I said, there was one in particular I'd be interested to see it back.
Which one?
I'd like to see it back, to see it, but it'll be quite obvious.
Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, was there any hit in particular that you felt that, do you ever feel perhaps Joe Canning might be targeted by teams?
No, I think all the opposition forwards will be targeted by the defenders. That's just the nature of the game. Like, you don't want to give any forward that and soft. And like, looking at it myself, I didn't think there was too much in anything. Like, it was a physical game at times, and like when a forward is going through like that, like, defenders trying to take the ball off, and sometimes he'll get a belt here and a belt there, and the referee sometimes has to play advantage, because if you pull it back, the whole crowd is getting on, because there was a goal chance on, a realistic goal chance, and I think it was just a shoulder he took at the very end and came down awkwardly.
Yeah, so fingers crossed he's going to be all right. We're going to take you to the newspapers and actually start with the photograph of this. So that there is Joe Canning lying prone after a shoulder from Kevin Moore. Now, this comes in the back of Dr. Kevin Moore speaking with the Irish Examiner recently enough. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's the former Donegal team doctor. He might actually still be the Donegal team doctor. And he's been talking about the recent backlash in high tackles, in hurling in particular. The couple of weeks back when we were talking about Cork and Kilkenny having players sent off, there was a massive outcry about one of those tackles and also one of the Tipperary red cards recently. And he was saying that I'm seen as a football doctor, but having said that, I'm on the Medical, Scientific and Welfare Committee. There was a backlash after Tony Kelly being sent off, but certainly I did see some tackles over the weekend that could be dangerous, no doubt about that. There's no equipment that can help prevent it. There are some studies that have suggested players wearing protective support are given a false sense of security. So he's saying that helmets actually might be contributing to hurlers receiving concussions because they believe that they're somehow protected from it. So hopefully the high tackle is something that comes out of the game even more. FAI rent payments to Delaney may spark wider ODCE review. So this is the Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement who are investigating the FAI, and now the fact that it doesn't look like the remuneration and the rent supplements were clearly recorded or certainly made public in the FAI's accounts. I mean, obviously they're there somewhere, but the ODCE may end up widening the scope of their potential investigation. So Delaney's on the front of the Irish Independent, and on the back, Galway floored by Dacia's late charge, and that's the picture of Joe Canning being stretchered off. Doesn't look like a groin injury there. And then Delaney isn't only one who should go, the board should go too. That's the headline on Eamon Sweeney's piece. We'll deal with that in a little bit. And then the Examiner, the power and the throne. FAI begins search for new CEO as Delaney goes global. Is that going global in terms of the story being covered, or is that the fact that he's going to end up working properly for UEFA? More than likely. The back of the Racing Post this morning, the full Monty, England versus Montenegro. Former chief bidder, it says BHA should focus on the positives. And then Walsh criticises tone of festival briefings. This is good. Ruby Walsh has criticised the daily briefings conducted by officials before racing at the Cheltenham Festival as condescending. I felt the manner in which some of the information in the briefing was delivered was wrong. The tone used by some of them and the way in which they spoke to adults and professional sports people just wasn't right. They spoke to us like little kids. That's not the way you should speak to anybody. This is daily meetings with the clerk of the course at Cheltenham. And then the Times, who obviously have done all the legwork on the John Delaney story. Fans to stage a Viva protest over Delaney. You've got to assume that there'll be no flags confiscated at this game. And they're also quoting from Brian Kerr. Delaney had a vice-like grip on the association since he's been in it. There's been a lot of bad feeling about the lack of transparency in the association for years, and I've been critical of it because the AGMs have been a farce. The lack of information, the lack of the ability of people to ask questions at the AGM and the organisation that they're the players in has been extraordinary. So that ain't going away. That ain't going away.
The Irish Daily Star this morning on the front page lead with red cards. It's Eamon Dunphy saying it's time for Delaney and the board to go. The back of the Irish Daily Star goes with they think it's all over, but FAI saga is far from done as new questions emerge. You got Joe Canning lying prone on the ground there yesterday after Kevin Moran's shoulder in the Waterford win. The back page of the Mirror goes with few. Relieved McCarthy, glad to see back of minnows, and now he wants Irish to make it 6 points on a Viva return. You've got that story about Joe Canning as well, and Pochettino saying City will be rocked by our new stadium. So Mauricio Pochettino watched Tottenham christen their futuristic new home and warned they were ready to rock Champions League rivals Manchester City. They've moved in there 7 months late at long last. The Herald at the front page goes with FAI's loan goal. Politicians want answers over Delaney's loan and €3,000 rent. Former CEO will still pick up €120,000 salary. The back page of the Herald then goes with FAI turmoil. More questions as Delaney steps down to take new role, while Dubs falls short as Treaty march to final. They were beaten in the hurling semi-final in the league yesterday. Then a couple of the UK back pages. The Guardian goes with a picture from the Wales-Slovakia win. Wales 1, Slovakia 0. Giggs' men kick off with a win. That's Daniel James celebrating after scoring the only goal of the game on his competitive debut. And hostile welcome is the headline on Dominic Fifield's piece here. England on full alert for fiery atmosphere in Montenegro. The Telegraph then goes with the £1 billion stadium opens for business. It's Paul Hayward reporting there from London. And Southgate warns we must stay calm. England manager urges players to keep discipline after Montenegro Ultras promise hellish atmosphere.
All right, Andy McGeady and Shane Keegan were on the paper review. You can get your podcast there, wherever it is you get your podcasts, or offtheball.com/podcasts, probably the best place. And they were talking about the new 50-22 rule, which has been proposed law change in rugby. It's designed to promote attacking play. Have a look.
I think it's a really clever incentive.
Simple.
Yeah, because the GAA are in the midst now of trying to deal with new rules and the law of unintended consequences, and it is complicated.
Yep.
But this law just seems to incentivise to the right amount, the right extent, doesn't change the general nature of the game.
And you don't have to do it.
You don't have to do it.
If you want to drop anyone back, if you want to say, listen, we think your kicker's rubbish, that's fine too.
Yeah, you'll need a great kicker, you'll need a solid line out, so you're going to win your own line out, say it's 5-10 metres from the opposition try line, but there are teams against whom you just cannot give them line-outs 5-10 metres from the try line. So you'll have to leave men back, therefore more space, and you might see more running rugby as a consequence.
Potentially. And this is the thing, it's all about potential. Even if you make those defenders think you're shaping to do that, suddenly space has appeared. So it changes the scope of what could be in front of him.